footage found on the internet reveals valuable clues about a missing student on TV1.
Tonight, a family fishing tragedy. 2 children drown in a sudden sinking in Auckland's Hauraki Gulf.
From the prayers
Thousands of New Zealanders remember on Anzac Day and pay tribute to the ones who never came home.
The Anzac spirit prevails at Gallipoli. Kiwis and Aussies make the annual pilgrimage to pay their respects.
And crashing out of the World Cup and the captaincy, Stephen Fleming retires as Black Caps skipper.
Kia ora, good evening. An Anzac Day fishing tragedy has ended in tragedy for an Auckland couple whose son and daughter have drowned. They were all out fishing early this morning when their boat began to quickly sink, giving the children little chance of surviving.
On a clear day, the chilling sight of the bodies of 2 young children being brought in from the sea.
It's pretty hard to prepare for something like that, your boat just sinking from underneath your feet.
The tragedy happened right here, just off Tarahiki Island. 5-year-old Travis Rolls and his 8-year-old sister Erina were asleep on an 8-metre boat. Their mum and dad and 2 others were on deck fishing.
The vessel started to sink at the back of the boat, and the driver of the boat attempted to drive it up onto the rocks to save it from sinking, and it sunk prior to him getting there.
In pitch black, the adults swam for the rocks. Then they made repeated attempts to dive down to the children who were trapped inside.
The boat has sunk, trapping 2 young members of the family inside it.
This tragedy happened at 2 o'clock this morning, but in perfect conditions just like these. So how did it happen? The police don't know the answer to that yet.
We're still speaking with the adults that were on board. Clearly they're in a state of shock. It's been a tragedy to say the very least.
The survivors were brought to this yacht club where the children's mother was treated and taken to hospital.
I really felt for the mum and the rest of the family. It's very sad, very sad.
3 men, including the father, were unharmed but frozen to the bone and in shock. The family had only just bought the boat. It now lies somewhere out there, waiting to be salvaged so police can find out how this horrible accident happened. Tony Reid, One News.
And police have launched a separate investigation after finding a woman's body close to where they recovered the bodies of the children. It's not known who she is, and police are asking anyone with information to come forward. Sir Edmund Hillary is said to be recovering well from a suspected fall and is expected to be out of hospital in a few days. These pictures of Sir Ed were taken during his trip to Nepal last week. On his return home, he was admitted to hospital. His wife, Lady Hillary, says he's improving daily and there's no reason for undue concern.
Thousands turned out for Anzac Day, but the commemorations have been marred by a protest in Wellington. Good weather across most of the country meant morning services were well attended.
No matter where you hear it, it always has the same meaning. The last post rang out across the country as New Zealanders turned out to remember.
We will remember them.
Auckland Cenotaph hosted 15,000. Under the dawn sky, both young and old gathered to pay their respects.
I remember a lot of those people that were with me are not here now.
The Birds joined in with the band at Hastings Civic Square. But in the Garden City, it was a much noisier affair. A round of volleys shattered the stillness of a balmy Christchurch morning for its 7,000-strong crowd. Further south, Dunedin had its biggest Anzac turnout in recent years. And even though Bluff was one of the only places in the country where it rained, the parade still went on. Protesters interrupted Wellington's dawn service. 2 people were arrested and charged with offensive behaviour after burning a flag and yelling insults at veterans.
I thought that was incredibly disrespectful.
I just thought it sounded really terrible. I was ashamed, really.
Hayley Westenra was centre stage, but the crowds were there to pay their respects.
Oh, just to remember the Anzacs, I'm glad we're all free today.
It's just something that you need to do, I think, as a New Zealander.
The soldiers that fought in the war that made it a free country.
Throughout the country, veterans marched to applause as they left Anzac services. Time is not wearying them. The number turning out to remember those who fought for us is growing each year. Beth Roach, One News.
While New Zealanders were paying their respects around the country, half a world away, thousands had gathered at Anzac Cove in Turkey. The Gallipoli campaign of 1915 marked a disastrous military defeat, but it's come to represent an important symbol of our national identity. Our Europe correspondent Melissa Stokes is there. Melissa, you covered the Gallipoli commemorations last year. How has the build-up been this time?
Well, Wendy, the build-up to this event is really quite muted. Well, it's probably one of the biggest influx of people into Turkey. It all happens extremely quickly. Business owners around the villages of Gallipoli Peninsula lament that now most tourists are coming in on package tours. They're whipped in and out of the cove within 24 hours. They come in, they take a tour of the battlefield, and then they come here to this very sacred site for the dawn service. As the light lifted over Anzac Cove, thousands stood where many have fallen.
They shall not grow old as we who are left grow old.
They came in their masses with no shortage of reverence for those who put their country first.
At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
More than 2,700 New Zealand soldiers died on the Gallipoli Peninsula. Up to 13,000 people have braved chilly conditions to remember their efforts.
It's quite a serious experience. Everyone's here, no one's here for a party. We're just all here to pay respect to those people who believed enough in New Zealand to die for it here.
It's a sacred site for Aussies and New Zealanders, many travelling to the Cove on a personal journey. For James Johnson, it was to remember his great-grandfather.
He was one of the lucky ones. Most of his regiment died, and he was lucky enough to just get wounded and be evacuated.
Others say it's part of our national pride.
I think it's kind of a rite of passage for a lot of New Zealanders in terms of their respect for New Zealand and just what they believe in for their country.
And the battle here has become part of our identity.
The bravery of our soldiers and the losses they suffered here 92 years ago remain seared into our history books and archives and into our national psyche.
1 in 4 New Zealand soldiers died on these shores, and today as dawn broke, their descendants and fellow Kiwis did their best to keep their memory alive.
Well, Melissa, both our governments and Australia issued terrorism alerts this year, but those fears don't appear to have come to anything at this stage. Has the security been obvious to you?
It's been very obvious here at the Cove, Wendy. From when you start and come down that road to the Cove, you go through a series of security points. And then when you get to the Cove, there was a patrol boat out in the waters there. You have to go through the baggage checks and come here. There were no problems that we saw, and everything seemed to go very smoothly. The Turkish officials take the safety of their visitors very seriously, and I'd say that most and the bulk of the people here were blissfully unaware of the security threat.
Melissa Stokes, thanks. Live from Anzac Cove.
We turn now to Australia, where around 150,000 people lined city streets to pay their respects today. Many of them have now retired to the pubs and clubs, and our correspondent Garth Bray is at one of them, the RSL in Chatswood. A significant spot for the Kiwi contingent too, Garth.
That's right, Simon. Not just because there's beer and a regimental brass band about to start up any minute now. This is also the official home away from home for all New Zealand servicemen and ex-servicemen if they're here in New South Wales. There are about 40 or 50 permanent members, and a number of others are upstairs, friends and family and so on, just soaking up the ambience, if you like. They need the rest because they marched along with about 22,000 others up George Street today. It was a fairly solemn occasion, obviously, the rain, but plenty of cheering crowds to push them on.
And of course, while most were respectful and solemn, that's not been the case all over Australia, one part in particular.
Nice, Simon. A rather disturbing story from Bathurst in the centre of the state, where people going to the dawn service this morning are heading that way. A few hours before that found a group of teenage girls had daubed a number of slogans across the town war memorial, describing Anzacs as murderers and suggesting that Australia shouldn't be involved in any wars. I understand police and others spent perhaps several hours trying to remove those slogans before the dawn service, and there are 4 young women receiving some counselling and one 16-year-old woman who's been charged with malicious damage as a result of that. So you could fairly say, though, that town of Bathurst is shocked at their protest.
Thanks for that, Garth. Garth Bray live from Sydney.
Anzac commemorations got off to an embarrassing start for the Army in Auckland. A Unimog truck towing a gun to the Dawn Parade collided with a van. The driver of the second vehicle has a broken leg and was taken to Auckland Hospital. Police are still investigating the accident.
There's a push to keep alive the memory of one of our bravest group of war heroes, the men of the 28th Māori Battalion. As their numbers dwindle, the families of the soldiers are asking the government to recognise their children.
Wikitoria writes war memories date back to the 1861 New Zealand Wars.
My father-in-law, who is Pākehā, wanting a better life for all New Zealanders. And I guess it was the same with my husband.
A treasure trove of war memories she wants preserved.
My own right as a widow, that the 2/8 be formed as a memorial trust, and so that the name will never be lost. And the children of the 2/8 will be able to carry that name on.
A 1964 Veterans Constitution says the legacy of the 28th Battalion ends with the last man. But their widows want their children to be able to represent their fathers.
There's no talk about the children being part of the association.
The government is backing their cause.
Clearly, the old soldiers are clear in their mind of how they want to wrap it up, and time will help that along, but I certainly do support the widows.
It's a task she's determined to pursue, determination matched by her late husband.
Excuse me. When you see them now and see how old they are and they're suffering with wounds, I guess I was lucky my husband never went through that. He's just collapsed while addressing his iwi at a hui, a Kauhanganui.
Wikitoria is determined to keep the memories alive.
I still think of him as my Casanova.
Tini Molyneux, One News.
Well, coming up after the break, an unlikely gathering as National and the Greens discuss the controversial anti-snacking bill.
Why filling up at the pump is about to cost you more.
And he bet on his own life, a big birthday payout for the 100-year-old who beat the bookies.
What does it mean to be Irish?
You get to sing and dance and drink and everything's somebody else's fault.
Teresa Healy travels New Zealand to discover.
How much of what we now call Kiwi comes from those Irish roots?
There'll be rugby greats, split ends, booze.
I'm comfortable just drinking continuously.
And Catholic schoolgirls.
It's true what they say about convent girls.
Forbidden fruit's always the sweetest.
We went wild.
They must have populated half the world by now.
Here to stay, Monday 7:30 TV1.